The iron gates of the Tower of London clanged shut behind me with a finality that sent ice through my veins. As a historical researcher specializing in Tudor-era executions, I had requested unprecedented after-hours access to the Tower's archives. What I thought would be a scholarly evening among dusty manuscripts became the most terrifying night of my life. The yeoman warder, a grizzled man named Thomas with eyes like winter fog, handed me the heavy brass key to the bloody tower. "Mind yourself in there," he muttered, his Yorkshire accent thick with something I couldn't quite place. Was it concern, or warning? Some nights, the past doesn't stay buried where it belongs. I laughed nervously, attributing his words to the theatrical nature all beefeaters seemed to possess. How wrong I was. The October wind howled across the Thames as I made my way across the cobblestones, my footsteps echoing off the ancient stones. The tower complex loomed around me like a medieval beast, its shadows deeper and more menacing without the usual crowds of tourists. Street lamps cast weak pools of yellow light that seemed to be swallowed by the darkness clinging to the Norman walls. The bloody tower stood before me, its name suddenly feeling less like historical designation and more like prophetic warning. The key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been recently oiled, or frequently used. The heavy wooden door groaned open, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling upward into blackness. My flashlight beam danced ahead of me as I climbed, illuminating rough-hewn walls that had witnessed centuries of human suffering. The air grew colder with each step, and I could hear something that made my skin crawl, the sound of children's laughter, faint and echoing, coming from somewhere above. The princes in the tower. Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York. Murdered here in 1483, their bodies never found. Every historian knew the story, but hearing what sounded like children's voices in the very place they died sent rational thought fleeing from my mind. I reached the upper chamber, a circular room with narrow windows that looked out onto Tower Green. The archives were kept in wooden chests along the walls, and I set up my laptop on a small table in the center of the room. The Wi-Fi was non-existent, but I had prepared for that. What I hadn't prepared for was the gradual realization that I was not alone. It started with peripheral glimpses, shadows moving where no shadows should be. I told myself it was fatigue, the strain of reading medieval Latin by lamplight. But when I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber door. I held my breath, waiting. The silence stretched so long that I began to wonder if I had imagined the sound entirely. Then the door handle began to turn, metal grinding against metal with the slow inevitability of a coffin lid opening. No one entered. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but the black throat of the stairwell beyond. But the temperature in the room had dropped so dramatically that my breath now came in visible puffs. I could see frost beginning to form on the ancient window panes. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking embarrassingly. "Thomas? Is someone there?" The only response was a sound that turned my blood to slush, the soft whisper of silk against stone, as if someone in a long dress was moving through the chamber. But I could see no one. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the screen showed no signal. Worse, the time displayed was wrong. Instead of the 9:47 p.m. it should have been, the screen read 11:59 p.m., February 13, 1542. The date Anne Boleyn was condemned to death. The silk rustling grew louder, circling me now. I spun in place, my flashlight beam revealing nothing but empty air and ancient stone. But in the periphery of the light, I caught glimpses of something impossible, the trailing edge of a green silk gown, there and gone in an instant. That's when I heard her voice. "Please," it whispered, barely audible but unmistakably female. "Please, don't let them forget." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls with the hollow quality of words spoken in a tomb. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair, and as it clattered to the floor, the sound seemed to trigger something. The temperature plummeted further. Ice began forming on the inside of the windows, creating abstract patterns that looked disturbingly like reaching hands. And in that ice, I saw her, Anne Boleyn, her face pale as winter moonlight, her dark eyes filled with an anguish that had endured nearly 5 centuries. She wasn't solid, more like a reflection in dark water, but she was undeniably there. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the sudden roaring in my ears. But I could read her lips well enough. "Help me." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the very air had thickened into molasses. Anne's ghostly form drifted closer, and I could see the terrible wound across her throat, the clean line where the executioner's sword had severed her head from her shoulders on Tower Green below. She raised one translucent hand toward me, and where her fingers pointed, frost spread across the ancient wooden chests. The metal clasps burst open with sounds like gunshots, and yellowed parchment spilled out, scattered by a wind that existed only in that supernatural space around her. One document landed at my feet, and despite my terror, academic curiosity compelled me to look. The paper was covered in elegant Tudor script, but as I watched, new words began appearing in what looked like fresh blood. The truth lies beneath the chapel stones. Find the letters. Find the proof. Free us from this endless torment. The writing continued, faster now, as if someone was desperately trying to communicate before time ran out. Henry hid them all. The evidence of his murders. We are bound here until justice is served, until the world knows what he truly was. Anne's ghostly form began to fade, but her voice grew stronger, more desperate. The White Lady knows. Follow her. She will show you where Henry concealed his crimes. The temperature began to normalize, and Anne's presence dissipated like morning mist. But I was far from alone. New sounds filled the chamber, the clank of chains, the scrape of metal on stone, and underneath it all, a sound that made my sanity teeter on the edge of a precipice, the wet, rhythmic thud of an axe chopping wood. Except there was no wood in the chamber. I knew that sound from my historical research. It was the sound of an executioner's axe biting into the wooden block beneath a condemned prisoner's neck. And it was coming from directly below me, from Tower Green, where so many had died. My laptop screen flickered to life, though I hadn't touched it. The cursor began moving on its own, typing words that appeared in that same blood-red font. She comes. The White Lady rises. You have awakened them all. The typing stopped, and my laptop screen went black. In the reflection of the dark screen, I saw something that nearly stopped my heart, a woman in a white dress standing directly behind me. I spun around, but nothing was there. When I looked back at the laptop screen, the reflection was gone, but new text had appeared. Follow me to the chapel. Come alone. Come now, while the veil is thin. Every rational part of my mind screamed at me to flee, to run from the tower and never return. But the historian in me was stronger than my fear. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, physical evidence of Henry VIII's murders, hidden for nearly 5 centuries. I gathered my courage and headed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, it slammed shut with tremendous force. The sound echoed through the chamber like a cannon blast. When I tried to pull it open, it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. That's when the children's laughter returned, louder now, coming from all around me. It wasn't the innocent laughter of playing children, it was the horrible, broken giggling of young minds driven mad by fear and isolation. The princes in the tower were making their presence known. 2 small figures materialized in the corner of the chamber, translucent and shimmering like heat mirages. They appeared to be boys, perhaps 10 and 12 years old, dressed in rich medieval clothing that hung in tatters around their ethereal forms. Their faces were pale as bone, their eyes dark hollows of accusation. Uncle Richard didn't kill us, the older boy said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of injustice. It was someone else. Someone who needed us gone to secure his claim. The younger prince stepped forward, and I could see terrible bruising around his throat. We were smothered as we slept. But the one who ordered it wasn't who history claims. They moved closer, and the temperature dropped again. Frost spread across the floor with each step they took, creating intricate patterns that looked like family trees, genealogical charts showing the Tudor succession. Henry VII, the older prince whispered. Our supposed protector. He needed us dead to legitimize his claim to the throne. Uncle Richard was blamed, but Henry's agents did the deed. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. If this was true, it would rewrite Tudor history. Henry VII, grandfather of Henry VIII, had founded his dynasty on the murder of innocents and the framing of Richard III. The younger prince pointed to one of the scattered documents on the floor. The proof is there. Letters between Henry VII and his agents. Orders for our murder. Anne Boleyn found them in Henry VIII's private papers. That's why she truly died, not for adultery, but for discovering the murderous foundation of the Tudor dynasty. As he spoke, the document he'd indicated began to glow with an inner light. I could see text appearing on its surface, written in the same archaic hand but clearly legible. To my most trusted servant, the princes must not live to see another dawn. Make it appear natural, and ensure Richard bears the blame. The crown depends upon their silence. H.R. H.R. Henry Rex. Henry VII. The implications were staggering. Anne Boleyn hadn't been executed for trumped-up charges of adultery and treason. She'd been murdered to protect the secret that the entire Tudor dynasty was built on child murder and the destruction of an innocent man's reputation. She's not the only one who knew, the older prince said, his ghostly form beginning to fade. Others discovered the truth over the centuries. They're all here now, trapped by the weight of the secret they carried to their graves. As the princes vanished, new figures began materializing around the chamber. I recognized some from their portraits in history books, courtiers, nobles, even a few clergymen who had lived during the Tudor era. All bore signs of violent deaths, severed necks, crushed skulls, bodies showing the marks of poison or disease. They formed a circle around me, their faces filled with the desperate need to finally tell their stories. And one by one, they began to speak. "I was Thomas More's secretary," said a man in simple robes, a terrible wound visible across his throat. "I helped him research the prince's disappearance. When we got too close to the truth, Henry VIII had us both killed. Thomas died publicly for his refusal to acknowledge the king's supremacy, but I was murdered quietly in my sleep." A woman in rich burgundy velvet stepped forward next. "Lady Margaret Pole, last of the Plantagenets," she said, her voice carrying the authority of noble birth. "I knew the princes personally. I knew they had been murdered by Henry VII's order. Henry VIII had me executed at age 67, not for treason, but for knowledge that could destroy his lineage's legitimacy." More spirits stepped forward, each adding pieces to the horrifying puzzle. A pattern emerged: anyone who had gotten close to uncovering the truth about the prince's murder had died mysteriously or been executed on fabricated charges. The Tudors had spent a century eliminating anyone who could expose the lie their dynasty was built upon. But the most chilling revelation came from a figure I hadn't expected to see, a man in rich ecclesiastical robes, his face bearing the marks of a violent beating. "Cardinal Wolsey," he said, though his jaw hung at an unnatural angle. "Henry VIII's most trusted advisor. I didn't die of natural causes as history records. I was murdered when I discovered Henry VIII's plan to continue his grandfather's work, to eliminate every last person who might know the truth about the princes." He gestured to the documents scattered around the chamber. "Those papers contain more than just evidence of the prince's murder. They contain Henry VIII's plans for what he called the Great Cleansing, the systematic elimination of anyone with knowledge of the dynasty's true origins." The ghostly cardinal pointed to a particular parchment. "Anne Boleyn was just the beginning. Catherine of Aragon knew something too. Why do you think she was really set aside? Thomas Cranmer, Thomas Cromwell, even Henry's own children when they began asking too many questions about their grandfather's rise to power." I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. If this was true, it meant that the Tudor era wasn't just marked by political and religious upheaval, but by a sustained campaign of murder designed to protect the dynasty's darkest secret. "But why tell me?" I managed to ask. "Why reveal this now?" The spirits exchanged glances, and Anne Boleyn materialized once more at the center of their circle. "Because you have something we never had," she said. "You have the means to share this truth with the world. In our time, the king controlled all information. Now, the truth can spread faster than any monarch can suppress it." She pointed to my laptop. "Take the evidence. Photograph the documents. Share our story with the world. Free us from this endless vigil." But as I reached for my camera, a new presence entered the chamber, one that made all the other spirits recoil in terror. The temperature didn't just drop, it plummeted so quickly that ice crystals formed in the air around me. My breath came in sharp puffs that hung like fog in the suddenly Arctic air. The figure that materialized was massive, dressed in rich Tudor clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face was bloated and diseased, bearing the marks of the syphilis that had eventually killed him. But his eyes burned with an intelligence and malevolence that transcended death. Henry VIII had arrived. Silence. His voice boomed through the chamber with such force that the ancient stones seemed to tremble. The other spirits cowered before him, their forms becoming fainter and more translucent. You forget your place, even in death. I am your king, and you will not speak against me. He turned those burning eyes on me, and I felt the full weight of royal displeasure, magnified by centuries of posthumous rage. And you, scholar, you will forget what you have seen here. You will burn these documents and speak of this to no one. But Anne Boleyn stepped between us, her form suddenly blazing with righteous fury. Your reign of terror ends tonight, Henry. This man will tell our story, and the world will finally know what you truly were, not a great king, but a murderer who built his throne on the bones of innocence. Henry's ghostly form swelled with rage, becoming even more massive and terrifying. I am king by divine right. I did what was necessary to secure England's future. You murdered children. Anne shot back. You continued your grandfather's work, killing anyone who threatened your power. You turned England into a charnel house and called it glory. The confrontation between the two spirits sent shockwaves through the supernatural atmosphere of the chamber. Documents swirled through the air like leaves in a hurricane, and the very stones of the tower seemed to groan under the pressure of their conflict. But then something unexpected happened. Other figures began materializing, not the victims of Tudor persecution, but different spirits entirely. I recognized them from historical accounts, the yeoman warders who had served the tower over the centuries, the priests who had blessed the condemned, even some of the executioners themselves. They formed a larger circle around Henry's spirit, and their leader, a man in the robes of a medieval chaplain, spoke with quiet authority, "Your time is over, Henry Tudor. These souls have carried your secrets long enough. Their vigil ends tonight." Henry's spirit lashed out with supernatural fury, but he was outnumbered. The combined will of centuries of tower residents began to push against him, forcing his malevolent presence back. His voice rose to a shriek of frustrated rage, "I will not be denied. I am king." But even as he raged, his form began to weaken and fade. The other spirits pressed their advantage, and Anne stepped forward once more. "Take the documents," she urged me. "Photograph them now, while Henry is contained. Once the sun rises, this opportunity may never come again." I didn't need to be told twice. With trembling hands, I began photographing the scattered parchments, my camera flash illuminating centuries-old secrets. Letter after letter, document after document, all chronicling the systematic murder of anyone who had discovered the truth about the princes in the tower. As I worked, more evidence appeared, as if the spirits were finally able to reveal hiding places they had guarded for centuries. A loose stone in the wall slid aside, revealing a hidden cavity filled with more documents. Anne's ghostly hand pointed to locations around the chamber, and each spot yielded new horrors: correspondence between Henry VII and his assassins, payment records for murders disguised as accidents, even early drafts of the histories that would blame Richard III for crimes committed by Tudor agents. The most damning evidence was a letter in Henry VIII's own hand, written to his father shortly before the old king's death. "Your legacy is secure, father. I have learned your methods well. The secret of our rise shall die with all who carry it. The princes shall be forgotten as victims of Uncle Richard's ambition, and history shall remember only Tudor glory." As I photographed this final damning document, Henry's spirit made one last desperate attempt to stop me. His form rematerialized with terrifying suddenness, reaching for me with hands that seemed to burn with unholy fire. But the other spirits were ready for him. Anne Boleyn stepped directly into his path, her own ghostly form blazing with the light of righteous fury. "No more, Henry. No more innocent blood on your hands." The collision between their spirits sent a shockwave through the chamber that shattered the frost-covered windows and sent ancient dust cascading from the ceiling. In that moment of supernatural conflict, I saw something that would haunt me forever: Henry's spirit beginning to dissolve, not into peaceful rest, but into something far worse. As his form disintegrated, his essence seemed to scatter into 1,000 screaming fragments, each one carrying the weight of his crimes. The fragments were pulled downward, through the floor, toward whatever hellish realm awaited unrepentant murderers. His final scream echoed through the tower with such force that I heard stones cracking in the walls. Then, suddenly, there was silence. The other spirits began to fade as well, but their departure was peaceful, filled with the relief of finally being able to rest. Anne was the last to go, and as her form grew transparent, she smiled at me with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "The truth will set us all free." And then I was alone in the chamber, surrounded by scattered documents and the lingering smell of sulfur. The temperature began to return to normal, and outside the broken windows, I could see the first pale light of dawn creeping across London. My phone had somehow regained signal, and the time now read correctly, 6:23 a.m. I had been in the tower for nearly 9 hours, though it had felt like mere minutes. I gathered the documents carefully, placing them in my research satchel along with the hundreds of photographs I had taken. As I prepared to leave, I noticed one final message had appeared on my laptop screen. The White Lady's secret chamber lies beneath St. Peter ad Vincula. More evidence awaits. The full truth must be told. I made my way down the spiral staircase on unsteady legs, my mind still reeling from what I had witnessed. The tower was stirring to life around me. I could hear the morning shift of yeoman warders beginning their duties, the sound of tourists already gathering at the gates. Thomas, the warder who had let me in the night before, was waiting for me at the entrance to the bloody tower. His weathered face showed no surprise at my disheveled appearance or the wild look in my eyes. "Found what you were looking for, did you?" he asked quietly. I stared at him, suddenly realizing that he had known exactly what would happen when he let me into the tower after hours. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "Been waiting 30 years for someone like you to come along. Someone who could handle the truth and do something with it. The spirits have been getting more restless lately, more desperate to tell their story." "How long have you known?" "Since my first week on the job," he said. "Anne Boleyn appeared to me just like she did to you. Told me to wait for a scholar who could help them find peace. I've been keeping watch ever since, making sure no one disturbed them until the right person came along." He handed me a small brass key. "This opens the crypt beneath St. Peter ad Vincula. You'll want to go there next, after you've had some rest and processed what you learned last night." I took the key with hands that were still shaking. "What will I find there?" "The rest of it," he said grimly. "The White Lady, Lady Jane Grey, she's been guarding the final piece of evidence for nearly 500 years. The document that proves everything." As I walked toward the tower's exit, past the famous ravens that had just begun their morning patrol, I realized that my life had been irrevocably changed. I carried with me not just historical documents, but the responsibility to right one of history's greatest injustices. The tourists were beginning to stream through the gates, cameras ready, eager to hear tales of the tower's ghostly residents. If only they knew how real those ghosts were, and how desperately they had been trying to tell their true stories for centuries. But now, finally, the truth would be told. The evidence I had gathered would rewrite Tudor history, vindicate Richard III, and expose the murderous foundation of one of England's most celebrated dynasties. The princes in the tower would finally have justice, and the spirits of the Tower of London could finally rest. As I stepped out into the London morning, I felt the weight of history on my shoulders. But I also felt something else, the presence of Anne Boleyn and the others, no longer bound to the tower, following me into the world to ensure their story was finally told. The Tower of London had kept its secrets for nearly 5 centuries. But not anymore. The haunting was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Author's note: this story is a work of fiction inspired by the real history and reported hauntings of the Tower of London. While the tower is indeed one of the most haunted locations in England, with numerous documented ghost sightings over the centuries, the specific events and revelations described in this story are products of imagination. The tower's actual history contains enough genuine mystery and intrigue to fuel countless tales of supernatural encounters. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.